Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Senior Summit podcast brought to you by Senior Summit. Today with me, I have Lisa Dillman.
Hello, everybody.
And Anna Lakin.
Hey, guys.
And our topic for today is, what is the longevity market? And this is something that's interesting to the three of us because we're currently building an entire platform that caters to the longevity market, the professionals, the businesses involved. And it's interesting because when we were sitting around the table, even just before this podcast, talking about what the longevity market means to each of us, we each have a different perspective as to what is incorporated in the longevity market. Who are we catering to? What does it mean in the next 10 to 20 years? So I'm actually going to put Lisa here on the hot spot. Because she is the original founder of this Senior Summit platform, and have her share a little bit about what she thinks is the longevity market.
First of all, I think you diluted the conversation. We almost went to fisticuffs, right? No, this is what the longevity market is. No, this is what it is. So I think just like anything, when you pour yourself into a topic or a study that is your passion, it evolves. Your understanding of it evolves. And I'll say for me, at first, I thought that there is a longevity market, that there's products and services that are going to coincide with this aging population. And I think I'm coming back from that a little bit. I wonder if longevity science, keeping us alive longer, is being conflated with or confused with a longevity market. Because to me, if we look at people and how they spend their money and how they spend their time, I see it more as a longevity movement, not a longevity market per se. Because even within those definitions of older adults, which, by the way, I just found out that they define 50 and older as older adults, and I'm about 10 minutes away from becoming an older adult. And so maybe that's why I'm like, there is no longevity market. It's the movement of us young adults just enjoying the idea that we're going to live longer. So I think to say that there is a longevity market, first of all, it's just too big of a concept to say that it's a market. So I'm kind of stepping back from that and embracing this notion of longevity movement, which has so many facets. There's religious and spiritual, there's socioeconomic, there's healthcare, there's political. I mean, there's so many facets that it just doesn't, to me, have a market. Now, does it have an economy? I think yes. I think the longevity economy, third in the world behind the United States and China, that's real. But I think if we're too myopic and say, oh, there's just a longevity market, we're gonna miss parts of the movement.
So something that I'm on the other end where I think, or I've kind of identified the longevity market as the baby boomer generation. And that's how I was looking at it for a long time. And even when I was doing some research before this podcast, I've compiled all these stats. The third largest economy in the world, half the GDP by 2032 is going to be older adults, the baby boomer generation as they reach the age of retirement. But I also think, the longevity market being baby boomers, but it's also all of the other spending that's happening to help that baby boomer generation as they age.
Well, and
maybe
it's the
not
preceding
even help.
generations too.
Yeah.
Sorry to talk over you. That's what makes it hard for me to define.
Yeah.
I think I went into it thinking it's the boomers.
Mm-hmm.
It's the boomers and us coming behind, but it's not. That's why the market concept's too big for me.
Yeah. No, as to what you're saying, like the caregivers, for example, what are they using that's helping them in taking care of their parents? All of that to me is what defines the longevity market. Maybe that's the longevity economy. I'm not sure, but I think there's several different audiences within that market.
And so when you say, Lisa, that it's a longevity movement, does that mean, is that the movement of the people into a space of longevity science or living longer, or is it a movement of those services that can be a service to those who are living longer? Like, what is the movement? Define the difference between a movement and a market, I guess.
Sure. I guess market to me is it's too limiting, because market equates to dollars for me. It equates more toward an economic movement, but this is so much bigger. To me, it's kind of like when we all started getting, personal computers, and then all of a sudden we don't have to read a book. We can just find our answer on the internet. That changed our personal paradigms. It changed who we were as humans. The way we think, what we expect, what is okay for us and what is no longer okay for us. I think that being, I don't know what that is, the information age or whatever, that's more than just a market force. It's so much more.
Building off that, that's what we're redefining aging and longevity, and the way that the information age, redefined the way that we live our lives day to day. Baby boomers are kind of changing that day to day. What does aging look like? What does retirement look like? Well,
baby boomers and everybody after them.
Yeah.
I think that, I guess I see it in both then. If it's a longevity movement and a longevity market, I kind of see them one and the same. I see, when I think of market, I think of kind of the side of how do you sell to that, and who is consuming. That's the market. It's the consumer and how you're tailoring your product to that consumer. That defines the market. And what is spurring that change in the market is the movement. So to me, I guess they kind of go hand in hand. I think there is a longevity market that is
the business opportunity.
Built upon this movement.
Yeah.
Just like we got all these tech products, that's a totally new market once the information age kind of began.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the way I see the longevity market. And I guess for me, it starts with boomers, because they, I guess, have a different expectation based on our focus groups and things like that. They just have a different expectation of how they're going to consume. And so then the market has to meet that demand, or it's going to fail. And
that all trickles down from the longevity. The actual longevity of their life is longer. So because of that, they have more time to deal with. They have
more time to consume.
Yeah.
Well, and I think there's something, and maybe it's because I'm closer to being in that market. To me, for instance, I was reading an article over the weekend. I was stuck in the car, running my kid around, and I was reading or listening to an article that put the concept out there that the first person to live to be 1,000 years old is already born. They're already on this planet. And to me, that crossed over from being a concept in the longevity market to being complete science fiction to me. There's just no way. I can't process that. I don't think that's real. So for these boomers and older adults, I think there's such a shift in the way of thinking that it's beyond just market forces, because they will be, or at least market forces as they exist today. We have to understand what this longevity science is going to do to our lives. Like, for instance, all of the stem cell therapy or gene therapy, the CRISPR technology to eliminate genetic disease, those things are very, very real, and they're coming very, very quickly. But to older adults, at least in my mind, that smacks of unreal, unbelievable science fiction. So when there are people living in this longevity economy that really can't wrap their brain around or their mind around what this new normal is going to be, I think that's an issue that is beyond sales and consumer behavior.
Yeah, I agree with that. Absolutely.
Yeah, and to think of how that will change the workforce as well, which is something that I wanted to talk about in terms of how does that affect, if people want to work longer, how does that affect how you manage multi-generations within your staffing, and what does that do for what retirement looks like? What does that do for how you spend your time with your grandkids and all of that? how the effect that living longer can have. The science fiction part to you is the actual science behind it.
Yeah, I think I have a hard time getting past the possibilities. And if I am, as a younger, older adult, what are boomers thinking? Because they have worked their whole life for this retirement. And then all of a sudden is this dream that they have accomplished gonna be a nightmare to them because they quit too early, or they redefine or defined their retirement phase wrong based on this economy, or based on, we all hear financial planners tell us how they can service our clients better by showing them how they're not going to outlive their money. How can they know based on this longevity science? That's not getting figured in right now in financial planning and in a lot of people's plans who retire at 65 and think they're there.
Yeah.
Right.
It's interesting, it was the last week, I was having dinner with my fiance's family, and his mom, she's a young baby boomer, and she's looking to retire in the next couple of years. And she was talking about something that has been a passion of hers, being potentially a life coach or something along those lines. Yeah. And when I threw out the term encore career to her, her eyes lit up and she was like, I like that. That's something that I could see myself doing, or something I love doing. And she's worked a corporate job her whole life. The opportunities that she didn't even think were possible, she hasn't even heard that term, are now coming into play.
Right. And I think that illustrates what I'm talking about, that within a 10-year difference, I'm getting ready to be 50, 40-year-olds that are coming up behind me, they absolutely believe in the possibility. Absolutely. And that's going to inform their purchasing decisions. They may retire when they're 45, knowing that at 55, they're doing the encore thing. The longevity market, these older adults and the preceding generations, we don't have that mindset yet. And I think shoehorning us into that mindset is going to be more difficult than the market is predicting. I feel like maybe the longevity market is saying, well, wait, we're going to give you all this new science. We're going to give you all these new products. And isn't living longer great? And I can't conceive of the answer being no, but there's fear. Surrounded with it. There's unknown. There's I can't believe it. I can't believe it. For instance, right now, if somebody told me, Lisa, you're going to live to be 120, you should take 10 years off and then go back to work when you're 60, I wouldn't believe it. I just wouldn't believe it.
Speaking from the consumer side, or you speaking from the consumer side, I think is scary for all, but something that's also different as a professional working in this market or this industry is that we're not, in a typical or standard industry, you have people who are serving the exact same clientele, doing the exact same type of work. For example, an elder law attorney is used to, working alongside other attorneys. In the longevity market or the longevity industry, we are putting so many different people of so many different disciplines under the same umbrella. That's also something that's hard to conceive. Like, how do we work together? How do we collaborate? How do we all define that longevity industry?
And I think
coming
that's
from
the
our
movement.
perspective,
I think that collaboration is kind of a part of that movement idea instead of the market idea. And so I think just having all those different disciplines working together.
Well, let's I think you have to redefine what you're in it for. Everybody knows there's going to be a huge market opportunity. There's going to be a lot of consumers. You have a lot of opportunity to develop new products and innovate. It's going to be how we do it, how we present ourselves in this market. And I firmly believe that if you stay true to, you want to help people, and you want to, and there's plenty to go around, you want to collaborate and synergize with people toward helping that consumer, I think you'll be fine. But the problem is, what I foresee could be a problem is, this technology is so huge. It's the difference between, it's life. It's living longer. It's living healthier. This technology and the science could bring out the worst in the industry from consumers and producers. So I worry about that this movement could bring out the worst.
See, this is where, again, coming back to what is the longevity market, you're thinking you're on the lines of strictly technology and science and where it's going. When I think of longevity market, it's what we're doing right now. It's the audience that we're trying to help right now in law, in finance, and
I think
it's outside of just science. So when I think of, it's, there's so much opportunity, and what's cool about this, I guess, point in time is that if baby boomers are staying in the workforce longer, they're also on board for, helping develop the products that are speaking to their generation. So they can be involved in the product testing. They can help you come up with exactly what it is their generation wants and needs, and you can test your own products on the people within your staff.
That's true. And I think that's why I'm taking very seriously the call in my mind that's kind of beginning to happen, and that is there's, for instance, those boomers that just are really tech averse. If they can embrace things like Uber, things like delivered groceries, just tech in general, they can lower their own costs for care eventually. They'll be healthier as they age. They will be more connected. The problems of isolation will go down. So to me, that's an opportunity. How can we educate seniors and people in the longevity market on all of the opportunities? But what I'm worried about, or what I'm thinking is out there, is a reticence to submit to that kind of change.
I think so too, but that comes with every type of movement or every type of major change that happens. When you have a huge market shift or a huge need for a shift, there's always a set of people who are resistant to that change, a set of people who are ahead of the curve, who have foreseen this change before anybody else did, and or they listened when no one else did. And then you have those people who are just kind of along for the ride and learning as they go. And I think that we have an opportunity. This is something we can foresee. You can see that there is going to be a market change because of just the size.
The numbers,
Right. Take all of the different opportunities for science, tech, finance, law, whatever it may be, out of the picture. And if you just recognize that the size of the market is incredibly different than what we're serving right now, and they're very vocal and vocalizing what they want, then we can adjust. We can be ahead of a curve. Where for me, tech doesn't make sense. And so when someone's like, one day you're going to have a tablet that you can touch buttons on and it will do things for you, that to me is so funny. Like, it's crazy that we've come up with that idea. This to me is something that I can completely conceptualize and I can see, and it bears out in numbers, and it's very real to me. And so that to me is the longevity market. It's in numbers. You have numbers of practitioners who can serve this number in the market that's coming.
Well, I think you hit on something really important, and that is we have to, if we're going to serve this industry, we have to listen. We have to, we listen second. We have to ask. We have to not assume that, if science is developed in this way and products have developed from that science, then that's certainly something that people are going to want. I think we have to be really cognizant of asking these boomers or asking these older adults, are you afraid? Are you afraid to live longer? Intuitively, you would think, as a young person, you might say, who would ever say they don't want to live longer? There are nerves associated with going past that, what you think your life expectancy is going to be. There are nerves associated with living in a world that doesn't resemble what you've spent half a century on this planet doing. So I think when I think of the longevity movement, what it's starting to sprout up in my mind is a series of questions, a boatload of conversations with people who are feeling these things, who listen to this statistic that the first person to live to 1,000 years old is on this planet. How did that just make you feel? It made me kind of feel sick to my stomach. Like, what does a 1,000-year-old person look like? So I think that's why I call it a movement and not a market, because I'm not ready to go to sales and consumers. I need to understand a little bit more of how it's going to make people feel.
And there's this ingrained kind of cultural notion in everybody that you don't want to get older. This ageism thing it's real, and And that's another part that's scary is how are we redefining what it means to grow older? People don't want to live longer because they think it means, the wheelchair that's on the cover of your pamphlet, and that goes back, you have to ask those questions again before you implement sales and marketing, because those old messages aren't speaking to the generation that's
right. It's a morbid
now.
message.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we have come up with some questions and put them here on the table. And I think we could definitely maybe answer some of these in the time that we have.
Yeah.
So let me touch real quick on the format. We decided that if we're going to debate so much over our lunch hour, then why don't we get some content out of it and debate a little bit on the podcast? So each of us threw a couple of questions into the middle. Whoever's question it is can read the question and kind of tell you what we were thinking, and then boom, we can start talking about it.
Yeah, so naturally I picked out Lisa's questions first, and based on the chicken scratch, I'm not really sure what she means here. Will human behavior...
Maria, let me do it.
Okay.
All right, here we go. So the question is, will human behavior be the rate limiting factor in the growth of the longevity market? And so where I was getting at was, I guess, kind of what I was prefacing it with, but really the question was born of, statistically, when I look at higher life expectancies or longer life expectancies, right next to statistics about chronic disease and the cost of care for chronic disease, are we going to, just because we are humans and we obviously as a culture are taking worse and worse care of ourselves from a preventative healthcare standpoint, are we going to undermine this longevity market? Are we going to essentially make sure that it never happens because we're dialed into eating our way, drinking our way, smoking our way into chronic disease?
Can we talk about this under like an American umbrella?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's probably where the statistics,
that's what I thought.
absolutely.
Yeah. Right.
But which globally may inform our answer if we can get our act together here stateside.
Exactly. Right. I think for sure in the time that we're living in right now, food that is not great for us is the most accessible food, and it is marketed in a way that makes it seem more affordable and easier and better.
It's subsidized.
Right, exactly. And so I do think there's a possibility that there will be a group of people or a section of the population that falls under the umbrella that doesn't bear out to the longevity type statistic. They don't live longer, because I am of the belief that what you put in your body is kind of how you bear out your life. And so if you're putting junk or processed foods into your body all of the time, well, you're going to live a less your life is going to be yeah. And so I think there will definitely be a part of the population, but I think there's another economic factor that goes into that, and it's who can afford that longevity science.
Yeah. And
are we living in a current economy now that many could afford the science to live longer, or because I believe that healthy living, just healthy eating is affordable. But I don't necessarily believe that indulging in longevity science is necessarily affordable. So I don't know.
Right. Well, and I think you're underscoring another big issue in this market or in this movement, and that is the disparity of wealth and who can afford to live longer and who just cannot.
Right.
And so that, I guess that kind of touches on the human behavior being the rate limiting factor. But maybe it is, maybe it's income disparity or economic disparity that is a rate limiting factor that'll always keep our life expectancies pretty average. Now, but then do you have a group of people who are going to live to 150 and then a group of people who are going to die at 75? And what does that look like? That's a mess.
Well, and going back to your science fiction feeling, there are going to be a specific amount of people or a certain amount of people that are scared for that, living longer. So, I've listened to a podcast before where a gentleman's coming on, and he spent his life studying longevity science, and he takes these specific compounds per day, and you're listening to him talk about what he does every day to hopefully increase his lifespan by another 20, 30 years. When I think about doing something like that, I'm putting things in my body that I'm not even sure it's hard to comprehend what it even is that I'm taking, that's a fear as well. Will that prevent people from living longer?
Right. So human behavior.
Yes, the human fear.
Yeah, is fear as well, not just necessarily like, the way you eat or those kinds of things. So no, I think fear could definitely play a factor in that.
Yeah.
Well, and we're kind of coming into a time where I don't know that everybody wants to live that long. I don't know if it's going back to that notion that you said, that Maria, that long life means long, sick, unhappy, lonely life. And so, some people talk about like assisted suicide and things like that.
Yeah.
Towards the end of life, so they don't have to live that way. So I don't know. Humans don't want to be alone. And so I think if you have one person among 10 who can afford this science or this lifestyle of living longer, but everybody else can't, I don't know that human behavior would indulge in living longer.
Right. Go back to, my grandparents lived into their 90s, and one of their big complaints was, well, all my friends are gone.
Right.
I don't really have much in common with the generations behind.
Yeah.
So that is going to be something that I think that this longevity movement has to address, and that is intergenerational communication. I mean, we're right in the middle of one of the most heated intergenerational battles between boomers and millennials. I mean, there is no love lost between those groups of people, and if we're all going to be living longer, we've got to find a better way to talk to one another through the generations, which is again human behavior and human choice.
Yeah. Right. All right, good question. Next.
Thank you.
That one's one of mine. You want me to read it?
You don't want me?
You can read it. I
All
don't
right.
care.
They don't trust my reading skills. Do boomers truly have wealth worth chasing, and does that trigger a new market landscape, being the longevity market?
Okay, so this is Anna. That was my question.
Anna's question.
Yeah. And I use the word boomer because, to me, the consumer within the longevity market is boomers and beyond. And and so my question is, because this has come up in some professional conversation, is there really enough wealth within that market or within the boomer generation and beyond the boomers? Is there enough wealth to really change what we're doing and tailor it to them? Or is this kind of beating a dead horse?
I want to take a stab at it. I feel strongly about this in that I see the statistics that I have looked at and spent some time with when I develop my kind of marketing strategies and things. Huge income disparity in the boomer population. Well, and just there's a huge age disparity in the boomer population. It's a huge generation. So you've got to consider there's going to be the very wealthy, and then there's going to be the very poor. There is a big fat middle in my estimation of people who are going to consume products and services. And so when you say, is there enough wealth, I don't know that there's enough super wealthy individuals to chase, but I think the middle, the gut of the middle is huge. And it's these kinds of recognizing how human behavior drives those choices. Absolutely, I think there's enough, it may not be wealth, but enough buying power when you put them all together. That's what the sheer number does for it.
Yeah.
When I wrote the question, I kind of came to the opinion that it's on the same notion. Do I think that boomers are the most wealthy of generations? No. Do I think they have a beautiful, sweet middle spot? Yeah. And do I think that as businesses we can tailor to that and capture that market? And if we didn't, we're sinking our ship? Absolutely. So I think that we can change our market to reach those people. But I think that the boomer generation and younger generations are all very vocal, and we have to be open to change. Maybe our traditional or someone else's traditional client was the very wealthy, but what they're selling is not necessarily something that this market is going to consume. And so I think that the only way is to adapt. We're going to have to adapt to their current wealth and the things that they want.
Yeah. And I think we have a pretty biased perspective in the sense that we're from the Midwest. So I think there's a ton of wealth on the coast that we
true.
necessarily don't speak to all the time or witness it firsthand in business and in our everyday lives. So we have this conception of this middle market boomer is the one that we're usually catering to.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. Okay, do another question.
All right, we'll do one more.
Oh, one more of mine. You didn't do any of yours.
Oh, I didn't mean to.
Oh.
If the longevity market is so rich and plentiful, why are there those within the industry experiencing things like staff turnover and record low sales?
Yes. So this is Anna. That's my other question. And this is partially because a part of what we do is consult with people and help them to solve their problems. And if I am preaching all day about the incredible opportunities built within this boomer era or this longevity market, then why are there so many people who are not wanting to work in this market? And I just read a report that in the senior living space, especially, they're experiencing record low sales,
Census,
occupancy.
census.
Yeah.
So what do you guys think? Why do you think that is? What do you think's going on?
What I've observed in the market in which I practice, which is Indiana and the Midwest region,
From a legal perspective?
in my elder law practice. So let me talk about it from there before I kind of conceptualize it on a grander scale. The waiver programs and the ability or the accessibility for in-home care is everyone thinks, oh, I want to stay home. I want to be autonomous. I want to do things on my own. And I feel like that has been very popular in the last 24 to 36 months in particular. The issue that I'm just now starting to see in my practice are some of those clients that we did a great plan for. They're at home, they're getting the care that they need, and things are beginning to break down. They don't want people in their house that much. They're up in their business. They don't have a private space. They weren't willing to submit to some of the other services that they need, like meal delivery or transportation. They wanted the in-home care, but they wanted their life to feel exactly the same as it has always been, and that is not reflective of reality. So I think that has really impacted senior living in the last few years.
What about the staff side of things? So even in the in-home care space, they see so much turnover of caregivers. If there's so many people who are consuming it, why? I mean, this isn't
Shortage. There's a shortage of caregivers,
There's
too,
a
yeah.
shortage of caregivers, and it's no secret that paying those caregivers is not necessarily the most livable wage that they receive. And so if you're serving such a huge population, why can't you pay more?
Yeah.
I have a little theory about it. The most in-home care agencies that I come across are franchise-based, and I think the franchise publishes certain benchmarks, certain numbers with respect to if you get this many care hours logged, you can achieve this much profit. And so with that franchise mentality comes a kind of a mentality that we're going to stay equivalent or equal in the market. We're going to pay this much, we're going to try to log these many hours, and we're going to achieve this much profit margin. And so we don't have in-home care agencies thinking outside of the box very well.
Yeah.
And I believe that if we had the agencies that either could think outside the box under their franchise contract or just said, hey, I'm going to do this different, I think we would see that particular organization achieve some much lower attrition rates and have staff that stays longer. There are ways to solve that problem. But what's interesting is I know for Senior Summit 2020, our biggest, our pet issue is staffing and the attrition of staff. And so I think there's going to be a lot of talk about that, focus groups, kind of some collaboration, but it's a problem that has to be solved. And I've started thinking deeply about it, and that's one of the things that I think, like, is the franchise mentality making it sure that everybody is eating the same cheeseburger. And if you eat the same cheeseburger, well, then you can't pay a nickel more for it and get a better cheeseburger. So I think that might be part of it.
Yeah. And that's not, I wasn't trying to single out just the home care space. That was just the example that she had kind of started with. But I think that's true. There's a lot of franchises within this longevity market, and they do have a lot of rules and regulations. And so that takes your thought leadership and creativity kind of down to a very small scale.
Yeah.
What do you think, Maria?
Well, this is the millennial coming out in me. And I may just be very surface level with this, but I do think it's systemic, kind of what you're talking about from the top down of leadership's version of the culture of these different entities and how it's always been, and how the services that you're providing for seniors are very outdated. And I think that the service that you're providing, or the way that you treat your staff, I guess I should say, with tons of hours, low pay, not a ton of career progression. There are things within that culture. I mean, I was recently talking to somebody who is a baby boomer and she's retired, and she said to me, why would anybody want that job? There's a reason nobody wants to work there. They're not good jobs. You don't make good money. You have terrible hours. You're overworked. You don't feel appreciated for what you're doing. And even though you're doing work that has meaning to somebody and is helping somebody's life, it comes back to your job satisfaction in that in that career isn't worth it. And
maybe it goes to and maybe the shift will come, that notion of decentralized management. So a lot of senior living spaces are corporate based or run from corporate. You maybe have a board of directors that you have to answer to, and you have strict profit margins to hit. So maybe that's still that feeling, that top-down feeling, and there are creative ways to change that, or at least talk about changing that.
Right. Yeah. We've seen some really cool examples. I was listening to a speaker. I can't remember what community he was the president of, but they've kind of built in some incentive, I guess. I guess that's kind of where it's at, right? If you're not just of the servant's heart, we all have to eat at the end of the day. We all have to have a roof over our heads. And so you do have to create a culture where people want to be. And I really think they kind of go hand in hand. You can't have incredible sales and a new staff member every day.
Yeah.
I think, like, this is a very rich opportunity in that it's plentiful. And so there's an opportunity for the longevity market to serve this plentiful market. And yet, if we're not nurturing those who are going to be delivering that service, then it's a sinking ship.
Yeah.
It's a double-edged sword.
And it comes back to that quality of life versus quality of care conversation that we've had plenty of times and that we hear over and over again, not to beat a dead horse, but I think that it's such a relationship-based industry as well that, again, if you have that turnover, then the impression that a baby boomer has when they put their parents into a senior living community and they're seeing their mom, pass through 10 CNAs within the 6-month period that she's there, what makes them ever want to envision themselves being in a place like that? Right. So it's a two-way street.
Right. No, I totally agree. Well, we have a couple of other questions, Maria's specifically, that we will put in these comments. You guys can definitely, please, leave your answers. What are your thoughts? What are your feelings on these questions that we had? And what is the longevity market to you all? Is it a thing? Is it a market?
Is it
are we going to talk ourselves? Are we going to, human behavior, going to work our way?
Yeah. Are we going to be too afraid to embrace it?
And make sure that, where are all the places they can?
Sure. So you can find us every other week on Spotify, YouTube, Pocket Cast, Radio Public, Breaker, and Apple or iTunes podcasts.
Cool. And, that's so many places. We're everywhere.
Yeah. And I think next up on the docket we have a woman from Meals on Wheels speaking about HIV and aging, which will be
I've
really
already
cool
said
topic.
I'm so excited about that.
Yeah. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Have a good
guys.
week.
Thanks.